the break, we started off with a big picture of where we've come from, and then we sort of looked into, what is an SBOM and how do we make sure that we're continuing progress on that. And we touched on the idea of the VEX, which is going to be a very important related aspect on this. We talked about the tooling side of things, of how do we actually roll up our sleeves and do this today. And then we heard from folks who have been doing it today. And I think that really underscores a point, which is there aren't many good reasons why we can't at least start this, whatever kind of organization you're in, to start creating SBOMs and thinking about how this data can help in your mission. And some folks that are spending a lot of time thinking about that, both how to communicate it and how to identify the mission, is the awareness and adoption group, because none of the work we're doing matters if no one picks it up and uses it. And so this group has been sort of tackling the less engineering side of things, but in some ways the most important side of things, of saying how do we communicate this and help people get involved. So with that, we'll turn it over to Audra and Josh.
Hello, how's our audio?
We can hear you.
All right, let me share my screen. We'll get started.
Just so you all know, we're going for most artistic slides again. Hopefully we pulled it off.
All right, can you see are you able to see our slides?
We can see your slides.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm Audra Hatch.
Hi, I'm Josh Corman, and I need to make a disclaimer. First, a tongue-in-cheek warning. Beware of the RSAC sandbox supply chain village. I think that is where then Director Krebs asked me if I'd be interested in serving my country during COVID, which is why I have to do my disclaimer. While I do work for CISA as my day job and am the chief strategist for healthcare in the pandemic response, I am here in my personal capacity in the continuity of now 8 years of work on SBOM, and my comments are my own, and I will have to make up that time later. So with that disclaimer out of the way, welcome to Adoption Awareness.
Quick overview of what we'll cover today. We'll do a recap of our mission and goals for those who are new. We will talk about what we're working on, which includes today's highlights, our ongoing efforts, and some highlights of future initiatives. We have an ask for the community, and then we'll wrap up with some resources and hopefully some time for Q&A.
So if you did download and preview the slides, we've made 2 upfront additions based on some of the content reviewed earlier today, just as a way to help detangle. If we are part of Adoption Awareness, we want to be clear and accessible and avoid confusion. So we added 2 upfront slides that you'll see here, but maybe not in the downloaded version. And I'll be brief on them. And also because I've been getting a lot of side channel about confusion over the relationship between SBOM and say something like VEX. So I actually presented this at our very first meeting in July, almost 3 years ago. And the point was that there are really 3 types of things I see happening now and in the future. This first green column is what we were referring to as the scope of a software bill of materials. It's the ingredients, it's just the facts, it's as built, the stuff inside without correlation or judgment. People will invariably, for one of the many use cases, and I want to remind people these are not all vulnerability use cases, there are license use cases and quality control use cases and all sorts of other things. But for one of the use cases, people may map that inventory of parts, the ingredients, the SBOM, the green, to a list of known vulnerabilities, whether they're in National Vulnerability Database or other sources like VulnDB and the like. And those are potentially exploitable. They're not all in the attack surface or the control flow. Some may be relevant, some may not be, and opinions may vary. So really, ultimately, there will be a third thing, which is some sort of, I think the way that Bruce and I put this on the first meeting was, we do need a way to tell our customers to make attestations across stakeholders in time that while we contain this vulnerability, there is an existing mitigation, or while we contain this vulnerability, it is not exploitable in our product. But there will be other things, and this might be where you would mentally bucket something like VEX or an alternative. So to be clear, most of today's discussion is about SBOM. It invariably, for people who are in their walk and run stages of the crawl, walk, run trinity, you may see increased content here, but they are distinct and complementary things. Next. And then we didn't have this before, but there's a bunch of brand new people texting brand new questions. So one of the things that ultimately got Audra noticed and to be a co-chair of this second phase was her artistic capabilities. We had put this together both graphically to depict that we're all in a supply chain. Most of us are in the middle. Key part, most of us are in the middle, meaning that we are both being asked for SBOMs from time to time, and we are asking for them of our upstream suppliers. And this canonical graphic and animations around it have been important resources that can be found later when we get to our resource section. Back to our regular agenda.
And just to check, are folks seeing the slides advance? I did notice Duncan commenting. Duncan, we're back on the regularly scheduled slides. So if yours aren't working, please go to the SBOM website and look at the PDF.
Okay, so a recap of what we are. We are really the phase 2 manifestation of what used to be use cases and practices. And the idea was, since this is already happening in a lot of cases, it's not just about creating things from the other 3 working groups you've seen. It's about making sure people know how to find them, know they exist, make sure they're accessible to a broad swath of stakeholders. So we wanted to have an outreach plan, a go-to-market, so to speak, take these much longer, verbose, and technical documents and turn them into shorter, fit for purpose for specific stakeholder types, and maybe be the on-ramp for people who want to get involved but didn't know where. So we would often introduce ourselves and triage to which working groups may be best for them. Next. And the goals and approach were to let people know what it is, get out to conferences. Obviously, COVID-19 didn't like that, but I think, to the credit of the many sweat equity volunteers that have helped us, we got really creative about doing podcasts, doing virtual events, doing virtual seminars, doing virtual proof of concept of Palooza type things, and we created more scalable content that may not have been thought of, including some videos and self-service items that you'll see throughout this presentation in our resource folders. And the goal was to get people on their journey and make sure they started that crawl, walk, run for meeting them where they are and getting them to where we'd like them to be.
So for those of you who are new to our group and our resources, the best place that I can recommend starting is our README file in our Google Doc. There's a link to the Google Drive in the last slide. But as far as finding things within, I would suggest starting with the README. It links to the FAQ, all the published documents, our working documents, the news, etc. So that's, I think, the best starting point. So a quick look at what we're working on. We're going to talk about SBOM at a glance, SBOM options and decision points, and then asking for and supplying SBOMs. We have put together an SBOM related efforts, expansion of our phase 1 appendix 1, which is what some folks asked for in our last meeting, resources that mention SBOM or are supportive of SBOM, ISO standards, etc. A quick note about the FAQ and some other resources. And then the remainder of this is mostly for reference. We'll touch upon these as we go through the slides for ongoing efforts and future initiatives.
And if you're a developer, since this was largely driven from software supply chains and development pipelines and the DevOps community, think of this like our pipeline. So just a similar view with the highlighted, bolded items are the ones that we're going to be speaking to today. So if you've been paying attention, quite a few people, there are wars and rumors of wars. There are SBOMs and rumors of coming SBOMs all over the place. We certainly appear to be hitting critical mass in the policy arenas domestically and internationally. And there's been software trustworthiness, or trust failures are very hot on the lips of most policymakers. So it occurred to us that while we have incredibly well manicured and vetted documentation in our repositories, we really should have something that is a page or two. So SBOM at a glance is one of our newest ones. It really skims the treetops. We're pretty happy with how it came out. And whether this is for you to understand SBOM at a glance and some reference materials behind it, or rather that when a business stakeholder that you work with, or a development lead or an architect is saying, hey, I need to get smart on this thing, where can I start? This might be a fantastic resource, maybe not for you, but for those that you seek to educate. I think that's good for right now. It's really part one of, at the moment, 4 in a series. So if that is kind of what is SBOM at a glance, which is not meant to supplant or replace the excellent materials from our other groups in phase 1 and phase 2. Chunk 2 of 4 is what we realize is when someone says, okay, I want to ask for this SBOM, or I'm being asked for this SBOM, what the heck is it? This was kind of a menu in this graphic, and it's going to be walked through in greater form. And what this was meant to do is, we know that since we're all in a supply chain and most of us are in the middle, there will be a lot of people asking you for SBOMs during their procurement stage or their acquisition stage if you're in the government. And how can we make sure that you can ask for and receive what you need as a requester? Conversely, since we're also all in the middle, or most of us are in the middle, we may be the one asking for our upstream suppliers, and we want to do that when we're in the other, with shoes on the other foot. Also, since this is at least a 2-party exchange, if you're a supplier of software and digital infrastructure, you're going to want some scalable, consistent, and efficient way to answer this to the your 1 through N through thousands of customers asking. So this becomes a way to dampen the operational variance, reduce friction, and more clearly articulate what is the art of the possible. And in certain cases, for brand new software or for high assurance use cases, like if you're going to sell to a high security, high confidentiality buyer, you may need to exceed this initial consensus or center column. And if you're dealing with really old legacy tech, where you didn't instrument your pipeline with these free plugins that automatically spit out a SWID, SPDX, or CycloneDX SBOM as a byproduct of making modern code for free, there's going to be some forensic archaeology that has to be done at times, and there may be some fallback positions. So this was a way to try to dampen the various dimensions of an SBOM. And we're going to walk through them on some subsequent slides. And to telegraph to our guest speakers, we've asked Sunil Yu to kind of walk through how he may use this to ask for SBOMs from his suppliers. And then we're also going to get a few minutes from Cassie, who's going to show us maybe as a supplier of SBOMs, how this could dampen the variance or confusion and give a more consistent thing to meet her needs. So with that,
quick note about the published document. It does come with additional text and description to help frame the graphic itself. And it also comes with a table version of the text. So you can take this and use it in your environment. You can modify it for your needs. But for this, we wanted to highlight the initial consensus of what is possible. And the minus sign is what symbolizes those fallback positions for, say, for your legacy tech, or and the pluses column are those enhancements for, say, high assurance use cases.
Yeah, and to restate, we currently have 4 in the series. We're thinking of maybe a 5th, which we will not name yet. But if number 1 was SBOM at a glance, number 2 is this is a structured way to discuss how to ask for or provide SBOMs. Then documents 3 and 4 to be written are what Sunil and Cassie will preview verbally. So let me walk you through this right now with a few builds. So don't blink, you'll miss it. So the initial consensus is simply a summarization. So what do we mean by baseline component information? You heard that from Michelle and Art in their section. These are the 7 attributes listed in the key below. We would like them to be machine readable. Guess what? We have 3 standards that support these 7 baseline component informations. How deep do you go? The answer tends to be as far as you can or all the way, especially on net new code. Any dependencies you have, say in a Java project, you can't build the thing without knowing everything that's in it. So as long as we're capturing that, this would be all transitive dependencies. And if you do have a known unknown, or that you would declare it. If there's generation frequency, the goal here in all of our initial phase 1 guidance is that as built with every update or change to code, major, minor, release, patch, anything versionable gets its own new accurate SBOM. And delivery and interoperability became critically important when you start to get into cross-organizational exchanges, because you want to know, is this via a portal? Is this via a DBOM? Is this via an email attachment? Is it in a zip file? Is it posted on a website? Where is it? So we started talking about that this should ideally be bundled by every product version, archived by the supplier for lookup, maybe in your support portal, the ACLs of who can see it under which confidentiality agreements and the like are an independent decision of your ability to create it and supply it. And then back to the 3-column thing I started with, these adjacent enhancements are not SBOM, but we do anticipate that at scale, once people have visibility into their supply, and if they're affected by a new CVE, there's a brand new one today that has me concerned, I may raise later. The ability to say, am I affected and where am I affected, means people will ask. And this could be something where you have some sort of negotiated service level agreement to make some sort of vulnerability claim within X amount of time of a new vulnerability. We know that this is the initial consensus. It's the center mass of what is possible. But we also know that already high assurance use cases are champing at the bit, want more things, and there are other projects clamoring to be in our ecosystem like DBOM, like manufacturer usage description mentioned earlier, like OpenC2, which predates this effort. And so there will be areas where you may be asked to go forward or backward. Click ahead, please. So this center column is what I've been speaking to. It is possible with greenfield new code, but click ahead. Watch or you blink and you'll miss it. Some of these customers may need more, and you may be able to differentiate if you can do more than the de facto baseline. And this is a snapshot today. But in other cases, you may have really, really old code, or somebody went out of business and you can't look further than you could. So maybe you're just going to be able to go to primary components. You may have to make concessions for your inability to decide what to provide what the market requires. But this at least dampens some of that conversation. And you'll hear about that from both Sunil and Cassie shortly. Next. So, Sunil, can you unmute or be
Sure.
unmuted if you are not?
Yeah. So as a buyer, I was at a fairly large financial services organization. As a buyer, the SBOM gave me essentially a risk reduction opportunity. There are two specific risk reduction benefits that I can get when I get an SBOM from a supplier. The first is it just accelerates remediation activities when we have a new vulnerability. So Josh mentioned this CVE that just got released today. The faster I can remediate it and faster I know where it is, it just leaves less time for the attackers to potentially abuse that vulnerability. And not having the SBOM means I just have to chase this down myself, and that could be precious hours and days. Second, it gives me a higher degree of assurance that the supplier software quality, since their development processes need to be sufficiently mature or modern to even create an SBOM, it gives me that higher degree of assurance that the supplier has at least a minimum level of software quality. JC mentioned earlier today, like how many legacy apps might have difficulty producing an SBOM. I don't know about you, but I would think twice about buying an app that is so legacy that they can't produce an SBOM. Well, when a supplier can't provide an SBOM to me, that means that I essentially have to absorb this risk. And it's important to call this out in our contracts and make it very clear that there's a risk transfer activity that's happening here. Specifically, there's risk being transferred from the supplier to me, the buyer. And so when this happens, I'd like to be compensated for it. And I would want to be able to stipulate this in our contracts. So essentially, the SBOM then becomes a new negotiating lever for our contracts. I incorporated the SBOM requirement in the software license and maintenance agreement that we established between my organization and the supplier, but you can incorporate it in a lot of other places too, your master service agreement or in some sort of security addendum or exhibit. Anyway, again, it's primarily I looked at it as a negotiation lever based on the sensitivity or criticality of the function that I'm depending upon that supplier for. And you can negotiate more favorable terms that will essentially help you offset the costs associated with that risk transfer. And those terms can include, for example, lower cost or more support, because those are the costs that I would otherwise have to bear. And I'm asking the supplier instead to cover those for me. As Josh mentioned, in terms of where we sit on the consensus, again, each of those negotiation levers allows us to establish some degree of give and take when it comes to, well, if you can't provide some of the items here in this initial consensus, given the sensitivity of the environment that I'm in, let's have some concessions, whether it's more support, better SLAs, whatever else it might be.
Thank you, Sunil. And as Cassie goes to mute, or unmute rather.
Yes.
Since I got a DM about this already, as indicated, sometimes you'll be asked to or rewarded for exceeding some of these. These are not pick one column. They are a bit a la carte. They just become a way to structure these, and there are infinite variables on these timelines, which is why we have a table cut and pasted that you can change your own language. This is meant to be a sample. So Cassie, what's the supplying SBOM perspective? I think you really helped us understand what might satisfy successful delivery and things that were previously overlooked.
Certainly, and I agree with what Sunil said. We are, of course, we receive SBOMs and want to have the latest and greatest. But as a supplier and a producer of let's just say products that have a very long lifespan, our contracts are renewing all the time. And with those contracts, there have been the new contracts that will be asking for SBOMs. But what is difficult from a requirement standpoint is, first off, it just says SBOMs. It doesn't list, as you've shown in this table, that the definition of SBOM has to be agreed to of what can be provided. There are a lot of industries that we work with where providing that SBOM, there is a risk. Where we want to make sure that the information that we provide is controlled. It could be encrypted software, anything like that. And also, when it comes to, like Sunil said, wanting the latest and greatest, a lot of our contracts ask for certain versions. So they could be legacy because the actual, let's just say, wastewater plant or something like that wants to keep a harmonious version of the product base, even though we may have next generation of that type of PLC or something else. And so it's very important also from our standpoint is that if somebody does need an SBOM, generally it says upon delivery. Well, that's great, but we've hoped that you've maintained patches, and a lot of large organization and utilities may not, they're on certain patch routines. So they have to be very careful that even though we may be updating our SBOMs as we update and patch and provide new versions for products, that they might be referencing SBOMs that don't correlate. So there is quite a bit of communication and operational activities that need to happen to get into the right alignment. And so the risk is also on the customer that they can't take for granted. They have to make sure that they're using and adjusting to the latest. And then again, on those legacy products, where whatever version that they've upgraded to, that they're aware and have put in the mitigating controls because they haven't moved to a next generation. And so I'm very interested in some of the discussions and such from a BEC standpoint, where we can give more detail. But when you have products that have thousands in your portfolio like we do, it's just going to take some time.
Indeed, and we'll be tweeting an animated GIF version of this shortly. And as she just indicated, as Cassie just indicated, something like Vex or whatever name replaces it. I think one of the tweets I did a few hours ago was that I think ultimately what you'll see is those two will be machine readable APIs and the like. So thank you for our guest speakers. The two publications of our four were the At a Glance is published and on the website. This is this graphic and document that allows you to review, cut and paste is also published. The two perspectives will be forthcoming after this meeting with great help from these and all of our other sweat equity volunteers. But for the remainder of our time, we're going to move to one of our other publications next.
Well, just first a quick note on this. This emerged out of the presentation that Sunil did last time and the slides and efforts that he put into that. And I really feel that through Cassie's feedback and making sure to capture all of the multiple perspectives, it was greatly enhanced. So thank you to you both, and thank you to everybody that has put in time over the course of the last few months to get some of these shorter rapid release documents out there. It's much harder to write a what's the line that you use about writing a shorter letter?
If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter.
So
yes.
Making things very concise and compact is a challenge, and I appreciate everybody's efforts. So thank you.
Yeah, I know everyone thinks their volunteers and sweat equity are the best. I'm really pleased. We all have very important day jobs, and people really hustled, especially when you started seeing rhetoric around public policy changes potentially coming. These become really critical gateway drugs for people to get their arms wrapped around this. Thank you.
So our next in review deliverable is a document of SBOM related efforts. This is something that was originally the Appendix 1 in our roles and benefits for SBOM across the supply chain phase 1 document. We got some feedback last time, or folks were asking in the last meeting, is there a centralized place that lists all of the things that reference SBOM, support SBOM, ISO standards, and there's FDA guidance. So we are releasing this as a standalone document. There were at least 15 additions. Some sections got major overhaul, got a major overhaul, and the link to the document, the current Google document right now, is there on the slide. And for this one, we'd like to request community feedback because we know that this is not all inclusive. We still have a few sections in there that we are aware of and want to continue to work on and need to write up. But you as the community also know more of these efforts than the small working group of us could possibly be aware of. So I'd like to ask that if you have something to add or take a look at the document, if you notice there's something missing, please add it. Please feel free to write a short 1-paragraph description of it, provide a link to it. Don't worry about the formatting, but add comments, add links to documents, and we can merge those in. And we'd like to give 2 weeks for that feedback. So we'll review any comments as of May 14th and incorporate those changes.
And since we are agile policy, as sometimes referred to, we do publish different versions as we get them. Speaking of which,
just a quick note: the FAQ is now in line with. We had done some work to the FAQ, and I don't believe it had been formally updated on the NTIA website as of our last meeting. So we just wanted to call out that is updated. There is a GitHub mirror. There is an official NTIA GitHub mirror of this now. And so if you are more interested in doing a pull request than, say, joining the working groups, or if you have conflicts with that, feel free to provide feedback to us through GitHub, or we have our meetings on Friday, and we can cover that in a little bit.
Yes, and there are a lot of new people on this first meeting. This is probably our core backbone document. There are so many really well designed and answered questions, such as the age-old classic, won't this be a roadmap to the attacker? And instead of it being snide, sarcastic, or dismissive of a sincerely held but belief that we actually have good responses to, many, if not most of the things you need are there. And if they're not, we add them in the next revision.
Another resource for folks who are new or looking to do SBOM presentations, we have a graphics repository of mostly serious graphics, but now with memes. Arthur inspired us with this. Should you use SBOM? Do you care about security? Yes, no. You definitely should use an SBOM graphic. And so, and there was also a Cyber 912 challenge that came up with a lot of really wonderful supply chain related memes. So I've added those there for a touch of humor. We also have our SBOM sticker. So, and the SBOM options graphics are also in that graphics repository now as well.
Yes, and a U.S. intelligence voice who heard the "Won't this be a roadmap to an attacker?" wanted to offer another meme with a curse word from Spider-Man Far From Home about blank please. We already know. So we want you to make some of these. This is a great way to add, if you can't come to meetings, maybe make a meme for your favorite FAQ question.
We also have been working on building up our SBOM slide repository. We have a bunch of new efforts, including a very large recent deck from Charlie Hart, which got a lot of great feedback from a meeting last week. And if you have SBOM slides, we'd love to have you contribute. And one of our initiatives that we'll highlight later is that we're trying to create a set of starter slides. It's really hard because different audiences have different needs and different styles, but having a repository of things to draw from is we thought was really important for the community. And that includes resources such as, just for an example, when talking about SBOM and talking about how it relates to those other things like the SBOM related efforts, we created a template slide to help you talk about how different things relate.
Two great tastes taste great together, whether they be Elliott's Mud or DBOM. This is something you can populate from our vast database. Go ahead. All right, so ongoing stuff. We certainly have no shortage of inbound requests, and with the potential surge in an acceleration in adoption of this that's being discussed internationally and domestically, this is our current list, and we're constantly doing a stand up to try to bubble sort it based on your feedback. We're expecting to get some of that today, but you can glance at this list right now.
One thing to note, we are trying to put together a list of just like time sensitive. RSA Conference 2021 is coming up, and there's a lot of SBOM and supply chain related content. So we're working on a Google Doc to pull together all the sessions that may have SBOM related content. So if you take a look at README, as soon as that has some information in it, we'll be adding it there.
Perhaps it's one of yours. My talk with Sunil and my talk with myself will both had quite a bit of SBOM content in them, even though it wasn't in the title. So please tell us about your efforts.
A couple other quick links. We try to capture news stories about SBOM. We try to capture recordings, presentations, and podcasts. So if you have something to contribute for either of those, feel free to jump right in the Google Doc and add it as a comment. And
yeah, example of this is some people don't like to read. So Chris Gates, myself, and others have pulled together a couple explainer videos. They're on the ntia.gov/SBOM site. They can include real world examples, but they can also use really illustrative examples like Josh's granola bar using our taxonomy nomenclature, and even BJ's SwiftBOM tool.
And we mentioned RSA. If you have upcoming events that mention or talk to SBOM, please send an email to sbomcalendar@gmail.com, and we'll be working on a form to make it a little bit easier to submit. The easiest thing to do is if you forward an existing calendar invitation, it's really easy to add to this. So if you know of an event or have an event, please send that information to us, and we'll get it added.
And on that aforementioned graphic that says, here's an SBOM, here's the other thing, and here's how they're two great tastes that taste great together, here's a very large and growing list of adjacent topics that make us stronger or we make them stronger. So you can pluck from that for your own presentations and add to this list. And then we have been maintaining in addition to the new refactoring we've just done for SBOM at a glance and the SBOM dimensions graphic that we're going to have you comb through in detail in your leisure, there's also some open switches and discussions we extracted that left on the cutting room floor from some of Sunil's original presentation and some of the vibrant, more empathetic, mutually beneficial discussions we've had. So this particular link allows you to have calming questions for your suppliers, and we may have a corresponding one as well.
Future initiatives, Duncan has pitched the idea of a use case repository, making something that's a little more agile or easy to update and building upon our phase 1 documents, which looked at use cases and state of practice. We also again want to highlight the starter slides, and we have actually the NTIA GitHub has been established, so that needs to move off this list.
Right.
But we highlighted a couple of ideas, originally 3 ideas to focus on for 2021. One of them is no longer here because it is we did it. We published it. So thank you again to those of you who helped us to get that onto NTIA's website. So we do want to revisit our outreach strategy. Not sure how long this COVID-19 virtual event / hybrid event as we move back into to full-on conference attendance, but we want to make sure that we are engaging with with folks and offering up opportunities to learn more about SBOM and whatnot.
All right, so a couple real quick hits. If you've been paying attention, you cannot blink or turn a corner without encountering something around software trustworthiness, software supply chain assurance, SolarWinds, other things, new CVEs that are in real-time operating systems that people are going to probably spend their evening looking into. And it really reminded me that, you know, Bill Gates changed the world with his trustworthy computing memo, because it wasn't a technological approach. It was basically saying, hey, this is an existential threat to our business. It's a value statement. If you can fix a bug, a security issue, or add a feature, you should fix the security issue. And I've been asking myself, what is the trustworthy computing memo or the trustworthy critical infrastructure memo now that we're seeing attacks on critical infrastructure, on hospitals during a pandemic, on water facilities, and affecting lots of federal agencies. And for years now, I've been kind of saying through, I think maybe 8 years now, I've been kind of hinting transparency is coming, right? If we don't want regulation or liability, the least we can do is be transparent. So Game of Thrones transparency is coming, which really often translates into SBOM is coming, or software bill of materials is coming. And really, I've been saying it long enough now, SBOM is here. Oops, I went too far, back one. You know, William Gibson's famous for many things, but one of my favorite quotes is, the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. SBOM has been here for quite some time in financial services. The FDA is the first mover to try to make it a regulatory requirement. And now with so many failures on this front, it's time that we stop wondering about it and talking about it and make it more evenly distributed. Take the current state of practice and accelerate and advance it. And I think we really have reached critical mass. So watch the builds here. This is not to have just a number of headlines, but really a variety of key ones. Pillars in this space that have long been setting the tone and pace, like Ed Amoroso, are saying the time has arrived. We have peer-reviewed medical journal articles on it, like NPJ. It's in NPR Marketplace, for goodness sake, talking about how important it is to have an ingredients list. The former head of ODNI Cyber and NSA Cyber, Rick Leggett, is doing things in the Hill on this. ANISA, so lest you think maybe the US could be convinced to slow this down, just like GDPR, sometimes Europe leads, and ANISA has been pushing pretty hard on a lot of this stuff. So it is here, we're ready for it, and it is time to start pushing. So next slide. Back to where I started with our Audible earlier, this is still really the green thing, but we know that as more people are asking for this and starting to operationalize the visibility it enables, we're going to have to lean in harder on something like a VEX, be able to do this at machine speed, in a self-service sort of way. I think these will ultimately end up as customer portal APIs or something, so they're machine speed, machine readable, machine producible, so that this can be a frictionless or near frictionless way that we do things. So we are going to have to be ready to shift from we already shifted from first to second gear. We're going to have to shift from second to third gear and maybe answer some of those questions that Bruce and I were asking at the very first meeting, July of 3 years ago. And as such, be prepared to accelerate. And our community asks are as follows.
We're always seeking new folks, folks that have projects or things of interest that they want to help lead. Please provide feedback on the SBOM related efforts document. We really want to have something as comprehensive as possible. We have the list of public recordings. Please help us. You as individuals can help with the awareness and adoption efforts by sharing SBOM recordings. Submit things to the calendar to increase awareness and visibility. And then we're always looking for introductions to other creative colleagues, contributors, new industry participants.
Yeah, I think we started as largely engineering focused, and some operational security people in hospitals having a real passion to need better visibility. We then started pulling in procurement acquisition people and governance folks. I think we're at the point now that to reach broader audiences, we could really use some creative, more visual creative people, more tailoring and using the right nouns and verbs for different stakeholder groups. So even if you can't pioneer the standards and formats and framing, perhaps you can help us translate this to the constituents who best need the on-ramps.
We also want to know how we can help you. What other resources do you need, and how can we improve our existing resources? And do our future initiatives and priorities align with yours? So please give us that feedback. Feel free to join us in our Friday meetings. We would love to hear from you. So just to close, a couple of links to resources. I encourage you to check out the README as your first stop for finding your way around our Google. There's a link to the direct Google and that, and a link to meeting notes.
Whoops.
Did we lose Audie?
We may have just lost her. I was busy trying to frantically figure out if it was on my end or further up north. So I think we may have lost Audie just for a moment. But Audie, can you try again? See if we can get you.
I got them on text, and sounds like they dropped.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the good news is that this was, as I understand, I think their last slide, and it was a phenomenal presentation. Thank you.
Can you hear us?
And yes, we can. Thank you. Want to take it home? Oops, we've lost you again. All right. That is the power that the current virtual-only environment has given us, as it's pushed us towards a more resilient model where we have to sort of be adaptive as things change.
It's like Murphy's Law of mobile phone calls. They drop right before you're ready to say goodbye.
But so I will, and by the way, if you can chime in, feel free to chime in, Audra and Josh. But I want to thank you guys for your work leading this. As you touched on, in some ways, this is a little trickier than just pure engineering because you're trying to affect a much more complicated and sticky system than just building tech, right? You're thinking about this in a broader context of operations and business and law and policy, and as well as actually changing human minds, which is a lot of fun and tricky. I can say one of the things that we heard, someone back channeled me while your presentation was going on, saying, hey, that at a glance document seems like a really useful resource. Perhaps it should be translated. And we have one volunteer, Tomo Ito, who is my counterpart at JP Cert in Japan, who said, you know, this is probably something that we could translate into Japanese. So if there's anyone out there, it's getting a little late for our friends in Europe to have stayed on. But if you think this is something that should be translated into Dutch or German or French or really any other language, please reach out and let us know. It's another area where people can roll up their sleeves. Anything else that anyone wants to add?
Hopefully we stuck our landing.
You did indeed. Thank you.
I think the slide that we may have missed was just this, the join us. Here's our Friday call time. There's a link to sign up to the working group and the mailing list. So apologies for the technical difficulties.
Oh, these things happen all the time. Thank you for the great presentation. And I encourage everyone to both check out these resources as well as think about if you or someone for your organization might be willing to roll up the sleeves and tackle this the key challenge of awareness and adoption. Thank you. And we are miraculously still roughly on schedule. And so now, before we move into sort of the community discussion side of things, I wanted to flag two efforts. So those of you who've been paying attention know that the healthcare community has been leading the way. And in part, they, and as well as the rest of your work, has inspired some other sectors to sort of get involved. And so I want to ask I want to ask Charlie Hart from Hitachi to talk about the work that the automotive sector is doing, and then we'll briefly touch on some very new work from the energy sector. Charlie? Oops, you're still muted. Hang on.
As I was saying, thank you, Alan. I don't have any slides, so I'm just going to extemporaneous here, if that's a word. So AutoISAC is the information sharing organization for the automotive industry. And we have embarked on a couple of different SBOM projects over the past couple of years. The first one, phase one, was to basically make sure that Alan understood the concerns of the automotive industry, and I think we did that pretty well. I've been working on with Alan and with AutoISAC both on SBOM now for probably a couple of years at this point. So our thoughts are well known. But the second phase began last fall, I guess around Thanksgiving, and it essentially was a supplier-driven effort to standardize the approach to SBOMs that would be used by the OEMs, which are automakers, I guess in lay parlance. And that has been very interesting. We started out with a tutorial, and some of you may have been to last quarterly where I talked about this. We had a tutorial from many of the people who presented here. It was absolutely fantastic, really great intro to deeper SBOM topics, maybe than we could touch on a quarterly. So that went well. And then we had sort of a discussion period, which ended about 2 weeks ago. But basically the discussion period was to rationalize the concerns of many of the suppliers. By the way, we're all competitors. And there are a lot of concerns regarding IP, regarding liability, regarding the usual kind of suspects, roadmap to the attacker, all of those things. And many of the people who were involved in the phase two process were not involved in the phase one. So it was a little bit of bringing people up to speed. So I'm happy to say that we have decided to agree to disagree, and we are going to move forward with some exercises so that we can come up with some sort of compromise that everybody can live with. The OEMs, in the meantime, are screaming for SBOMs, I think, and we'll start be asking for them very shortly in some of the new orders that they're placing. So time is of the essence. And as I said, I'm happy to say that about 2 weeks ago, we sort of finished our discussions, moved on to the exercises, and we've been doing that weekly with about 15 very large suppliers, and it's going, I think, at this point pretty well. Stand by for more results, but we do have an aggressive timeline. We're hoping to get this approach pitched to the OEMs and bought off by suppliers and the board of AutoISAC around October this year. So wish us luck. I think that there might be some people from the AutoISAC program on the call. If so, let me thank you guys. And if you have any further comments, please feel free to jump in. If not, obviously, don't bother.
Thanks, Charlie. Really appreciate this. And I know that you and the community have been good about reaching out to the broader SBOM community, say, hey, we have questions. Do you have some thoughts about what some of the, as you looked at this, are there some things that you might anticipate being able to share back with the community?
Yes, so I guess, well, the first thing I would say is Audra alluded to a deck that I put in the share for the Awareness and Adoption Group. That deck was built to facilitate a 90-minute tutorial of SBOM for the greater AutoISAC community. Remember, what we're talking about is with the suppliers only, and there are about 60 organizations and about 400 members of AutoISAC. So we had 110 at that discussion. It went quite well, I think. And the slides from that are available. They've been sanitized, but they are available for general use. And the second thing I would say is, it's a bumpy road, and you need to be very careful how you proceed. A lot of people have preconceived notions about SBOMs, and they are all, I think actually Josh said this, but they are all actually, there's no wrong opinion about SBOM, and you need to overcome those objections with logic and sympathy, because they are real objections about real issues, and you can't poo-poo them. So those are the two main lessons learned so far, I think.
Thank you. It's a great point, and something that, I think one of the things that made the SBOM community so powerful is there is sort of this empathy. We have the folks, everyone knows where we need to go, and everyone's quite respectful of each other's challenges. And so we're trying to make sure that we're all.
I answered your question, Alan. I realized I kind of lost track of it there in the middle of it, but hopefully that was somewhat helpful.
Great, thank you. I'm going to just pull up a quick slide here to talk about some of the work that's been happening in the energy community. And this is some work that just started at the beginning of this year of 2021. We had a series of educational webinars for the broader energy community, which is a fairly large and diverse community, focused primarily on sort of bulk power generation and transmission. And of course, those of you who've been following policy know that security in the ICS space in general and the power space in particular is quite important and a big priority. And so we've been working with that community to think through a energy proof of concept. I don't think that Ginger is on the line yet. Catherine, do we have a Ginger yet?
No, she has not rejoined yet.
Okay. Ginger Wright from INL is one of the two co-chairs, and the other co-chair is Tom Ulrich. So let's get Tom ready to chime in. So just very briefly, what we're thinking about, we're after sort of having a lot of direct one-on-ones with NTIA, and Tom has had his blog that has been talking about this. We're moving into the initial planning phase. And so taking a page from the healthcare group of thinking about, how do we make sure that the working group is open and anyone can join. And then part of that working group will be a sort of protected data exchange, and we'll figure out what that data exchange looks like. We now have Ginger on the call. So I guess I can turn things over to you to give a quick summary of the initial planning phase, and then we'll let Tom chime in.
Sure. So I think Alan has put a lot of good words on the slide. First of all, this proof of concept is a partnership between the Department of Energy and the national labs and their Citrix program, cyber testing for resilient industrial control systems, and then taking with NTIA Commerce and taking advantage of all of the good work that you all have been doing to apply that for the energy sector. We're really excited at the opportunity to both educate some of the energy sector players who are brand new to the idea of SBOM, but of course very desirous of some of the security benefits that ensue, as well as working with some of the vendors who are already producing SBOMs and some of the third-party practitioners who are consuming and analyzing them so that we can determine how best to apply SBOM technology in the energy sector. There is a sign up email that's at the bottom of this slide. So please feel free to join our proof of concept if your time allows. There will be rich discussion, rich opportunities to learn. And if you've got anybody, I joined the conversation a little bit before, that you're leading along, our meetings might be very good for someone who's getting an initial sense of what SBOM is all about, since that's what a lot of our proof of concept members are doing. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Ginger. Tom, do you have anything that you want to add to make sure we know about?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
The main thing I want to emphasize is this is going to be as much an educational program as it is strictly speaking, the proof of concept. And the meetings are open to anybody, not just from energy. If you, as long as you're a user of electricity, you're welcome to join the meeting. Not quite sure how you could join it with that, unless you are a user of electricity, but so they are open to everybody. We're talking about topics. There's very little that's just specific to the energy industry at all. It's really very general, and we'd like to have all viewpoints participating. So the way to get on the list is sign up at the address below. And that's it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tom and Ginger. And again, we're very excited about this. This is something that we all know is something that's important to this community. And we're helping that community sort of learn all of your lessons that you've learned and wrought out of gray matter over the last few years. And we're also very excited because it represents a new opportunity of partnership to show, hey, this is how innovative policy can work, which is we are agile, we are flexible, and we're sort of building and respond to the community. And I think that's sort of another thing to highlight here is as the needs of the community has evolved, and as we as a community have made progress, we can now continue to change how we're working. And so different communities can adapt and collaborate in different ways. The automotive sector is doing their work under the auspices of the ISAC, and that's great. That's part of the reason why ISACs are there, is to foster this kind of collaboration. The energy world, we're taking advantage of the existing resources like the national labs for similar purposes. So we are now, we finished with the passive sit and learn for yet another very long webinar section. And now it's time for you who haven't had a chance to weigh in to sort of say, hey, what else should we be working on? The broader question, as I talked about at the beginning, is when this initiative started, we didn't have a great way of thinking about SBOM. There was no shared vision. Took us year and a half to build out the shared vision of SBOM in a way that is both universal but flexible, maps to existing standards, has a clean story around use cases. And then we focused on thinking about implementation side of things, and that's really where the work has been going on, and it's ongoing, right? You heard today that the deliverables that each of the working groups have been tackling have been a little more agile, a little more iterative, rather than waiting for the final thing. Or say, here's a draft. What do people think about it? Let's get further feedback. That's how we can make change happen rapidly. So when I talk about phases, we are trying to not say that we're done completely, but we're looking ahead. And this is where we need, as a community, to say, what further do we need to think about? And so let me pull up just a few inspirational questions that we can try to tackle. It's always that awkward point that I don't want that slide deck. I want this slide deck. And so as folks begin to think about, feel free to either chime in the chat or raise your hand and we'll give you the floor. But what I'd like you to do is say, hey, oops, hang on, there we go. If our next challenge is not just saying, implement this a little bit, but if we're starting to say, hey, how do we think about implementing this at the scale that we know that we need? What are some of the obstacles? And this can be on the policy side or on the awareness side. This can be on the technical side. It can be on the operational side. So what are some of the things that we need to start tackling now to focus on? And then the other question, which we'll get into in a little bit, is going to be sort of making sure that this is modular and complementary. But I want to open the floor to folks that might have some thoughts on this, the key questions about looking to the next phase. Yeah. All right. I think we've got a comment from Josh. Do we want to open his mic?
I think we're open. I was just going to be sarcastic and type that by obstacle, you mean Ninja Warrior course that really impressive people can navigate over, under, around, through, as opposed to deal breaker and like, oh, the dog ate my homework. That kind of obstacle course, right?
Challenges are things to be embraced. Yes.
Well, in all seriousness, though, as I mentioned, Bruce and I were very keen, even in July 20, whatever it was, the first meeting, we're going to, as these come in at higher volumes, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and at least in our group, we're going to be talking about some of those new use cases of, so you've got SBOMs produced automatically by your build pipeline. Where do you put them such that when you get an inbound request, your help desk can easily provide those SBOMs to customers, or they know they exist, they know which version of products are affected. So some of the operationalizing these things to support things like a persistent attestation across stakeholders in time. People are doing this. They're doing it in bespoke ways. I think there's certainly opportunity to make this scalable faster by sharing what does and doesn't work and lessons learned. And I think, at least for the adoption awareness, this is not something we flagged, but we're interested in so that we can best serve this increased demand.
Thanks. No, I like that way of framing it, especially as on the producer side, it's going to be not just enough to sort of generate them, and that's the fun challenge today, but how can they serve them? And I think we've got the first step on that front, but we're going to need to expand that. Elliot Lear, who has some good thoughts on, in fact, exactly this question about how do we distribute them.
Hi, Alan. Good afternoon and good evening to colleagues and friends. I like that scaling challenge because that's sort of where I started from, but my mind works a little differently in that I sometimes think bottom up. What would be useful, I think, for one of the groups, maybe it's the healthcare vertical, maybe it's framing, maybe it's each of the groups, in fact, to think in terms of the lifetime of a device, in terms of how many times they expect to see updates to, say, regarding vulnerabilities, come up with some number, and then take that number of device, per device, and multiply it by about 15,000. And the 15,000 number is what I would expect at least a good number of the people on the call, on this call, in terms of the organizations that they're in, that would be the number of types of devices that they should expect to see. So how would they like that processing to occur? What is the path of a new SBOM when software is updated? How do you learn about vulnerabilities? How do you learn about VEX statements? What are the processes that you would like that to happen? And from the MDM standpoint, right, what are the authentication processes that you feel you need to automate in this process? Because Alan, I think, used the word help desk. I'm going to guess that, in order to scale the number to the number of customers you have, the last thing you really want to do is involve a help desk in this process. So thanks very much for the ability and for the opportunity to comment, and wish everybody a great day and evening.
Thank you, Elliot, and we appreciate you working late at your time in Switzerland to join this conversation. And I think you've highlighted something as we sort of have thought through some of the SBOM generation side of things. How do we actually make sure that we can, at scale, manage them? And some of that's going to be on the producer side, some of that's going to be the consumer side, and of course, there's going to be the link between them. I have a hunch there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all approach because different communities already have some different tools. The last thing I want to flag that sort of relates to Elliot's point is, and also on Jay Scott's point, and Jay, I'm happy to give you the floor if you'd like to expand more on this, is a lot of these challenges that we're bumping into aren't unique to our world. We may, by forcing or by encouraging SBOM to be an important part of our software assurance and software supply chain breakfast, are saying, hey, this problem is now in a little sharper relief. But the question of how do we think about identity? How do we think about versioning for products that have multiple versions of a product for a single thing isn't unique to our world. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're building on the solutions that are out there, as well as helping take the solutions that are there and saying, hey, let's amplify them. We've got a couple questions up, a couple hands up. So we've got Bruce and then Bob. And Jay, if you'd like to amplify your question, that'd be great too. Bruce? Oops, we're still muted for you.
Can you hear me now?
We can,
Hello?
thanks.
Okay, great. I would say that for adoption, there's two barriers that I can think of that sort of haven't been talked about a little bit. The first one is tools, but I'll just talk about what kind of tools. I think we need tools in for organizations like Qualys and Rapid7s or other ones that consumers can use. I mean, it's great to have an SBOM there that's in JSON format or whatever format it's in, but you know that's not really human readable, and some of these people are going to want to know what they are. The best thing to do though is integrate it with tools that people are using today for finding out, you know, what vulnerabilities need fixes that are in their products. The second one is naming. We need to solve the naming problem, and that is, you know, when I see a name of something, I know what that is. It's great to say that you know, product A includes component B, but if I don't know what A or B is, that's not very helpful. So I would say, you know, that needs to be handled. I'm not saying it needs to be handled by you know, NTIA or not. I'm just saying that when we're looking at barriers to adoption, I think those are areas that need to be addressed.
Thank you. No, it's a good point, and yeah. I see that Scott Paretsky has a comment in the chat that if you would like, which is, hey, let's be careful let's be careful with the standard side of things. And I agree completely that we want to make sure that we're not rushing to throw it in an international standards thing just because that we're actually able to show that what we're doing works at scale. And certainly the US government has always been a long-standing proponent of international standards, but at the same time, we want to make sure everyone who's in the standard world knows that the standards world is littered with great ideas that people spent too much time focusing on the de facto standard. They ignored the de jure standard. And so I want to do that. Scott, you sort of had your hand up, so do you want to chime in on that? And then we'll go to Bob. And we're going to open up Scott's time. Thank you, Catherine.
And now you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Thanks for coordinating this great session today, and thanks for all of the leaders in the working groups and the contributors there. This is fantastic work you're all doing. I'm Scott Paretsky of Ericsson. I'm involved, I'm an active member of the ORAN Alliance's Security Focus Group. We're looking at SBOM there. Through that role, I'm very well aware of ADIS beginning to look at this. GSMA is looking at SBOM. So I am fearful of fragmentation with different standards bodies coming up with different standards. It needs to be unified. And then we also have to consider the fact we have different nations working on it. You mentioned ENISA, of course, there's what you're doing. India is making a lot of progress here as well, and other countries. So I'm interested to hear from you, Alan, what your perspective is on how we can avoid that problem and come up with one common solution that vendors can implement and consumers can use.
Thanks, and I'm happy to let others chime in on that particular question. What I can say, especially on the telecom side, some of you are familiar that the T in NTIA stands for the National Telecommunication Information Administration. Rolls off the tongue. And you may know that my colleagues have been instrumental in advancing the National 5G Strategy, the National 5G Security Strategy, and working with a number of those organizations. So we're very happy to work across the ecosystem and make sure we're very interested in avoiding forking a lot of the NTIA processes to say, rather than focusing on the data format itself, let's focus on the interoperability and that way, and focus on the operational considerations that are needed. If anyone wants to chime in, they should definitely think about this. Feel free to chime in on the standard side. I want to get to Bob, and I see that we've got some great conversation in the chat. and a few more hands raised. So let's go to Bob Martin.
Thanks, Alan. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yep.
What I actually wanted to riff off is your scale. We've been very engaged with the end users and the producers, but end users aren't going to be sitting there catching these, individually. So there's the whole, how does your organization manage your assets, and getting all of those vendors to get into this so that we can match the SBOM to their needs as well. And then the other side is we're not going to have individual software developers and product developers creating these SBOMs. So we need to make sure the tools they use create the SBOMs, the ecosystem that they work within, move them around.
Bob, we're getting we got a slight hiccup after the tools moving them around. Catherine, can you confirm that's not just my audio that's failing? Can you nod if you're? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So Bob, we may have lost you there. Oops. So, sorry, Bob, we'll come back to you on sort of thinking about the tooling. And I think that's one thing that I was really excited to see in the Plug Fest was some folks who actually come from that world and saying, hey, let's put plugins for this stuff in things like Maven and in some of the other approaches. So let's see, we have other, if anyone has some thoughts, feel free to raise your hand. And if we've dropped you earlier, we'll come and pick you up. I'm scrolling back through the chat now just to see if we have some further comments here. So Rich has a very good point that what we'd really like to do, and I think one of our ways of thinking about the end goal is that this should be a natural part of obtaining a dependency. And we're very lucky to be working with not just the Linux Foundation, but some other folks that are thinking and spend their time further up the supply chain, especially in some of the open source world, that allow people to start thinking about how do we put this into some of our raw ingredients so that this is part of the natural build process. And similarly, this is something that our friends at Oasis and OWASP have been involved in. And I know that Steve Springett, who's the lead behind the CycloneDX format, has been pushing to say, how do we make sure that this is part of our natural building or tool chain as well. So let's see if there are, got a note about Duncan saying most build chains have the ability to create an SBOM and some of this as well. And yes, that's a great point, Duncan. And in fact, the tooling group has sort of categorized these, and I want to move in that direction. Further thoughts? Forgive me, it's always challenging to run both the chat and to listen to whoever's speaking at the same time. And so I want to make sure for folks who are curious about the software identity and naming side of things, the framing group's software identity white paper is an excellent start. That sort of ties like what are some of the challenges are and the need, which is on one level, CPE is going to be useful for mapping this to the National Vulnerability Database. On the other hand, we don't always have CPEs for everything, which is why the healthcare group has started to use what they refer to as pseudo CPEs, because of course, how do we make sure, how do we actually map them when something doesn't have a CPE? And the one rule of thumb that I take away from the framing group's software identity white paper is, for God's sakes, don't invent your own name. Right? Always use someone else's identity string so that, if nothing else, we're on a path to convergence. Other thoughts on thinking that folks would like to share on where you'd like to see us heading next, or indeed something that you think maybe one of the working groups or a new working group should be tackling. I want to sort of keep us in sort of this breadth first search style. Cassie has a great suggestion, which is, hey, once these playbooks are out there, we should make sure that there's a nice accessible introduction to them. And it's a really good point. Thank you for that idea. I see that Dick Brooks has a hand up. And then we'll go back to Bob. And the other thing I'll flag is if you are on your phone, you can hit *6, and that will open your mic. So please use that respectfully so that we don't have a lot of overlap. But if you're on the phone, you can still join the conversation. So Dick.
Thank you, Alan. Just want to say you guys are doing a great job of getting the word out about SBOM. It's everywhere, so thank you very much for all that for all that exposure. And I guess I'm just wondering, do you envision NTIA or another party providing some type of certification process for tools that claim to be SBOM, compliant or capable of processing SBOMs? Thanks.
It's a fun question, and folks in the tooling group should chime in. We've certainly NTI in its government capacity would not do that. What we'd like to do, and this came up in Kate and JC's presentation, is to take the collection of tools that we have today and help scale that. And so right now it's in Google Document, and we want to move that to GitHub. And there was a bullet on that slide. You can find the slides on the NTA website. It says we're going to be establishing something that's a little more organized as a governance process to say, if you can do X, that's the threshold. You'll self-attest to say, and that will get your tool as part of this. And that way, folks can look at these resources and know what it is they're getting. We're really not in the business of endorsing anyone, but we want to make sure that people who are looking for tools and looking for either open source or commercial tools can know what they're getting. And Kate chimes in on the chat that she's got that each of the formats has validation tools. So in addition to making sure that your SBOM is operationally correct, we also can use the tool validation approach. So on that, we'll go to Duncan, and then we'll go back to Bob.
There we go. I'm now unmuted, I believe. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Wonderful. So I was just going to say on the scaling issue, there is a large startup issue associated particularly with open source, but it's a one-time cost kind of thing, and it'll solve both the people. There's been a lot in the chat about, hey, we're never going to have a complete SBOM. A lot of the issues is because you don't know the dependencies of the dependencies of dependencies, and a lot of that is in the open source, that once it gets done, it's done once, and then you have that answer for every other time you use it in the future, and people will start then making even design decisions based on, well, I won't use it if I don't know what's in it, and I will use this one that I do know what's in it, which will sort of force everyone up. So I think there's a startup curve we have to get over, but I think we're pretty near to getting there to sort of help with that dependency of dependency issue. I do think the automation is going to be the key, and automation not just of the building of the SBOM, but the analyzing of the SBOM.
Well, see, now I'm worried that the
decision making on what to do, acting on it, which is one of the areas I care about. Over.
Thank you. Thank you, Duncan. Appreciate that. And it's possible that this might not be one person's endpoint, but it might be some team's infrastructure issue. So thank you to everyone for your patience on this. Let's go Bob to finish off his comments, and then we'll go to Josh, and then we'll go to Vijay.
Thanks, Alan. Hopefully it's a little more legible now. I really just wanted to close out that given where we've been and where we need to go, we should also look at what other information would be useful to carry with us. And so, for instance, we've been talking about the components, but what about the other kinds of dependencies like a service or runtime libraries or even privileges that the application needs? I've had several people talk to me about how they could manage their apps better if they had an authoritative way of knowing what it's going to want to run in a standardized format. So lots of opportunities there.
No, thank you. It's a great point. And for those of you who looked at it, if you thought that the identity challenge was tricky for static, well-documented components, just wait till you learn about the rest of the whole ecosystem. And ultimately, we're going to need some sort of federated model, and I know that there actually are quite a few solutions out there. But again, we're faced with the challenge of not that there aren't any standards, but there are too many ways of looking at it. And so trying to make sure that we can help them interact so that people can actually consume the data will be key. We have, I think it was Josh and then Vijay.
Thank you. Yeah, foot stomping and building off something Duncan said. I flirted on and off and had a few collaborators trying to make a cartoon of the 5 stages of SBOM grief, right? The 5 stages of grief. And one of the things that looks scary when you're first approaching this is that how can this possibly work? And it's going to be so hard, and maybe I'm going to have bad stuff in my SBOM, and we forget that everybody poops, and everyone's gonna, before we looked at this in the past, we just had stuff, and then when we look, we're going to see a whole bunch of stuff we didn't expect to see, and about 80% of it can just be updated to an API compatible, less vulnerable version, and 10% of it, 20% might be really hard. It might take a little while. But I think to foot stomp something Duncan said, the first time an organization's asked for one, it'll be jarring. Once they've created it for that first asker, giving it to other askers is less jarring. And once they realize that the manual process isn't super great, they will start to use the plugins that already exist for Jenkins or other build tools. So this is going to kind of be a light dawns gradually over the whole. I think sometimes we convince ourselves this will be really, really hard. These are things that can be done. The adoption and application are the missing piece. And I think people will see that before you even go to ask your supplier, they may have already answered this for one of the other customers that did so. So it's not to say it's easy. It just means this is happening in parallel when the right incentives and nudges, like we seem to be getting, that'll happen. Number 2 is, even though he hates it, hearing over and over that he's anti-SBOM, Weissopel, who was pro-SBOM in our RSA talk, Chris Weissopel, he likes to remind people, stop expecting this thing to be perfect on day one. Let's stop letting the enemy, perfection be the enemy of the good. And that I think channeling Jennings, HTML version 1.0, none of us would want to use it right now, but it worked and it evolved and it got better. And I think sometimes we call these challenges like naming or namespace. We give them more oxygen than they deserve. Of course, we should be working on them. But we don't even have namespace solved for most parts of computer science. And I don't care if it's named 7 different things if they all have the same hash. So there are ways to make progress. And I think my favorite part of the healthcare proof of concept is they said, screw it, we'll do it live. And they have already demonstrated value, even with handmade, imperfect SBOMs with lots of blind spots and gaps. And the goal here is to maybe shortlist out of 200 or 20,000 devices in your hospital. Here's the 20 I might need to look at first. And you can do that right now with imperfect information. So just a reminder that this can be started and can be extended.
Thank you, Josh. And by the way, we don't call them handmade, we call them artisanal SBOMs. and you pay a premium for those. Now, and I also want to flag, to both your and Duncan's point that change is coming, and to imagine it. Dick mentioned, hey, we're now hearing about SBOM. 2 years ago, very few people had talked about it. Now, people like Josh have been talking about this for years, and in fact helped get it into a congressional task force report, as well as other resources. But it was still a pretty niche topic. And then you all joined this initiative and have been working on it. But over the past few months, I think we've all seen it pop up in a lot more different places. And that's a sign of what that progress can look like, and a hint of what we'll be able to see in different components as we start to sort of promote this idea. We have VJ, who's been waiting patiently. Oops. We still have VJ, you may need to unmute yourself. Catherine, do we have a VJ?
I believe so.
Yeah, can you hear me
there
now?
we are. Thank you. We can
Yeah,
now we can hear you. Thanks so much.
I actually wasn't planning on talking. I tried to click the chat button. I ended up clicking the raise hand button. But anyway, only one comment I'd make is there's plenty of tools for automatically building SBOMs that are slowly showing up. Just recently, I was working with the SCAP group, and the RPM to SWIT is a very solid tool now. It's very good to, if you are producing RPMs and Debian.deb builds, it's very easy to spit out a SWIT, and SWIT to SPDX is not difficult to do any of this. That's all I'll have as a comment to say. It's very easy for people who are doing development to start spitting this out, especially the modern development. If you're doing CI/CD looking development, even with Maven, converting that XML file to SPDX and to SWIT is nothing. Also CycloneDX and all of them. That's all I have. Thanks.
Nope. Thanks so much. It's a great point, and I think also underscores a point that Bob made earlier, which is now that we know how to think about developing it, we've built it into the tools, and we have great tools that do translation, like VJ, your tool. Then let's start thinking about how do we actually integrate, then process this data, intake this data, and integrate it into the other tools that organizations are using. And in fact, if you think back to the asset management tool, the VEX diagram, it explicitly calls out, for an example, asset management as a great way to sort of integrate this. Further thoughts that folks have, if we're keeping an idea on where else you'd like to be heading as a community, or other things that we want to throw on our to-do list that you didn't hear about today. I'm going to take that as a very full-throated, if silent endorsement of the next steps that each of the working groups has sort of lined up for themselves. But I have a hunch that some of you have some further things on your wish list. Which was a lot easier to do when it was in person and I could make awkward eye contact with each of you. All right, Dick, something new that the working groups haven't talked about that you'd like to sort of add to the pile?
Hey, Alan, thanks again for the opportunity. Yeah, one area that I think we really could use a lot of help with is alignment between the SBOM data elements and content with the NIST NVD data. It's just right now there's just a tremendous number of false positives that get reported, and it sure would be nice if I could send the equivalent of a SQL query to NIST NVD that says I have this SBOM product name, this SBOM version, and this SBOM other data, and I'd like you to do a search on it to see if there are any known vulnerabilities. That would be so incredibly helpful. So anything you could do there would be great. Thanks.
Sounds like quite a non-trivial engineering feat, but on the other hand, something that that could be enough of a public good to sort of nudge someone in that direction to funding it.
Yeah, I'd be happy.
Thanks.
I'd be happy to, take my SBOM, for example, and submit it to the NIST NVD folks and let them register that information so that they don't have to do any work. They just process the SBOM, and that becomes part of their, their database. Thanks.
Thanks. Further thoughts on where you as a community think that we should be heading as we sort of look down the road? Right, obviously the work underway has, I think, been very productive. But is there something else you want to say? Hey, this is a more ambitious down the road approach. This is a fun thing to keep in mind as you continue to work on the on what's in front of you. But I see that we've got Tom's hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. You know, I mean, in terms of a big need, I think it's really on the end user side, on the tools that they're going to want to use, you know, SBOM data for, you know, again, configuration management, vulnerability management, you know, software asset management. And, you know, it's unfortunately, until there's a good way to get data into those tools, SBOMs are not going to be terribly useful. And so, I mean, that's going to be a critical factor, and we'll focus on it in the energy POC. But you know, it'd be nice if there comes some kind of universal API, you know, that all the tool makers could write to, and then they would all, you know, be able to just kind of automatically ingest an SBOM. I don't think that's the case now, but I mean, I think that would be a great thing to have.
Can you give us an example of another area where there's sort of a universal API for this kind of data? What should we be modeling it on?
Oh, I don't know. I'm pulling it out of the air, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, there are all sorts of APIs. I mean, I guess, but it would take me a little while to think of one else.
No. It didn't mean to put you on the spot. It was more.
Yeah.
It was the universal side rather than the existence of the API side that I was questioning. I think that speaks to the challenge that a number of you have raised so far, which is how do we actually get the SBOM data there? Some, you know, and the solutions range from, you know, on a device side, have the device give a pointer to where the SBOM sits, to, you know, just have it for SWID, which is or co-SWID, where the data just follows the blob, because it's for the built metadata around the build. So there are some solutions, but yes, the challenge is going to be to help each community recognize what's ready for consumption. And in terms of using the data, I think that's something that some folks may be able to argue that, in fact, we can use this data quite constructively today. Certainly, I heard Sunil talk about that and how he and his team were using it. But it's undeniable, Tom, that if we can really help the scale into tools, we'll be able to use it a lot more effectively. And I know that the healthcare community has been working with a number of different types of vendors to sort of say, how do we integrate this data into our existing processes?
Yeah, I don't think it's any sort of big challenge, really. I mean, it's more inertia. And
right. Yep.
The tool makers right now, I don't think, maybe with the exception of one or two, are not really paying much attention to this.
We've got, you'd be surprised. I think there's it's an area that we haven't, there hasn't been marketing language around. Hint, hint, this is a chance for any enterprising person in the space to sort of drive some marketing value on.
There you go.
The challenge is going to be, is having this, and I think this underscores one of the chicken and egg problems that we always bump into for SBOM, which is because there aren't SBOMs out there, there aren't as many tools to use it. Because there aren't tools to use it, people aren't sharing it.
Yeah. Well, and the POCs can address this. I mean, they said, we'll definitely try to do that in the energy POC.
Excellent. Any further comments on what you'd like to see? And it's another chance. This is the Awareness and Adoption Group mentioned some of the work they're doing around related efforts. And so this is a chance for anyone to sort of chime in and say, hey, there's this other project that we think this could be complementary or supportive to. We have a chat that says, hey, we should have some signatures on SBOMs. I think that's a great idea, and certainly something that all three data formats have some ability to play with. My mantra has always been, if your code is signed, use that mechanism. And if your code isn't signed, you have bigger concerns than worrying about an unsigned SBOM. All right, well, we're not going to waste folks' time. I did want to make sure that the community, that you had a chance to sort of weigh in on what you'd like to see more of. Certainly the fact that so many of you have stuck around through the conversational side says that it's not just about education. It's about actually contributing. And that's really our goal here. So I will allow folks in the chat to sort of chime in one more time with what they think they're looking for. But otherwise, I think we might be able to wrap things up here and say, in terms of what we're trying to do to help support this, is really take advantage of the momentum that we have underneath us. The power of what's come out of this comes from all of you. Right? It comes from a community that says, hey, this is important. We think this is valuable for security. We think it's not necessarily instantaneously easy, so we're going to spend our time working on thinking about it and tackling all of these challenges. And I think over the past 2.5 years, coming up on 3 years in July, we've helped define the center, and we've pushed out how we need to think about it. This isn't just, right, when we first started talking about it, we're saying, hey, what is an SBOM? In fact, the first meeting, we didn't even have that conversation. We had the debate about, should we even do this? And the good news, looking back 3 years ago, is it's clear that you all made the right choice. That you sort of stood up and said, yes, this is important. Yes, we need to do this. We need progress for transparency in the software supply chain. And I know, especially when you start to say things like 3 years, you can say, well, my goodness, that's kind of a slow process. But I want to remind you that, one, you were starting not quite from scratch, but something that was slightly harder, which is a bunch of diverse perspectives and divergent perspectives that you all worked to help unify and weave together. And two, the challenge you were facing wasn't just, here's this one community. This isn't just a Defense Department effort where at the end of the day, all the contractors are going to do the same thing. The problem you guys were tackling was literally all software on the planet. You wanted to find a solution that could scale for that. And I think you found that, and you're making great progress in that direction. And so and we're starting to see that more and more people are starting to pay attention and work on this and build on this. So to a point that came earlier, we want to make sure that we continue to keep the community oriented around this shared nexus, that we can build and extend on it, right? As communities come forward and do things like have better definitions of build tools, we can link to that, we can complement that, we can support that, and so on, without losing sight of the minimum viable model, without losing sight of the stories that we tell and the tools that we can continue to add to our list, and the proof of concept work to demonstrate what's feasible. So I will close out with one of my refrains, which is, if you have questions or comments or opinions or very sharply worded criticism, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are here to support your initiative. And that's something that I'm quite proud of, is that, right, this really is a community effort. This isn't the government dictating what to do. This is the government enabling you to define what you'd like to see in the future of software assurance and software supply chain. So unless anyone has sort of some quick last minute comments, I think we'll give people 10 minutes back in their afternoon, or allow our friends in Japan to go and get a first cup of coffee or tea, and we'll allow our friends in Europe to actually get on with their evening. So thank you all for taking the time. Slides are posted on the NTIA website. We will work hard to have this video posted online in the next week or two to make it so that anything you might have missed, you'll be able to catch up on. And with that, I'm going to do one last round of thanks to our working group chairs. I give them pretty rapid deadlines of saying, I need slides, we need these deliverables, and they're very patient with me as I try to extract those resources from them. And the last thing I want to do is thank Catherine Brzezinski, who has done a lot of the behind the scenes work to make this meeting possible. And so thank you. And we look forward to continuing to work with you. If you haven't had a chance to join the working groups yet, it's never too late to roll up your sleeves and dive in.